Well, my main advice is for the audience to buy super glue and glue themselves to the chairs of Grand Rex. The first film I ever saw in a cinema in my life was a Columbia Pictures film. The second run or the third run, or God knows which runs of the film Barabbas by Richard Fleischer. However, I was not aware that it was a Columbia Pictures movie because I saw that film in Iran and they used to remove the logo of the studios because they didn't want to promote Americanism. So my first Columbia Pictures was a Columbia picture without the famous logo of the lady with the torch. And that's the very first film I've seen in the cinema, and I've made a documentary about the experience of encountering that film. Columbia Pictures was not a very affluent studio. The number of A productions were rather limited. And because B movies were made quickly, they could show perhaps a more accurate picture of the world, or American society in particular, compared to bigger productions. And when you look at the history of Columbia Pictures, it's quite incredible that the studio was quickly responding to some of the key issues of its time. From the Wall Street crash in 1929, and it's not surprising that the first film in the program is called Wall Street, from 1929, all the way to the rise of fascism and the post-war landscape. So the series of films that Columbia, for instance, produced between the early 40s up to the end of the war are quite incredible in their depths, in their even prophetic aspects. I can name a couple of films. We all know The Great Dictator by Chaplin, one of the greatest anti-fascist films and anti-Nazi films ever made. However, 10 months before that film came out, The Three Stooges, the most humble production of the studio, short film, 17 minutes, they made a film which featured both Hitler and Mussolini and made fun of them. And many of the jokes that you see in The Great Dictator or some of the films made later, for instance, Dancing with the Globe, the most famous scene from The Great Dictator, is already in this very modest Columbia production. Of course, this is the centenary of Columbia Pictures, so the main angle and reason for going for Columbia was the 100th anniversary of the formation of the studio. However, I always kind of struggled with a key question when it came to the history of major Hollywood studios, because of course it's very easy to go for the major titles that a film studio has produced over the years and show some of the major classics from that period. My aim was to look at the history of Columbia Pictures and see whether I can tell the story differently. By differently, I mean covering a wider range and trying to detect certain themes and stylistic approaches to filmmaking throughout the history of Columbia Pictures. And for that, the period 1929 to 1959, the so-called golden age of classical Hollywood or the studio era, sounded like the most relevant period to focus on this particular theme. I can add something else as well, because it was a modest studio. Anyone who wanted to do something, in other words, to experiment, but within the given budget, he or she was allowed to do so. And that created a great degree of buzz, people coming in and out, dropping in and out all the time, and many different voices adding to the character and to the overall quality of Columbia Pictures films. And this is, for me, the key question. How can I make a program that shows the history of the studio, celebrates the legacy of the studio, but at the same time acknowledges the greatness of the director, the authorial voice? Columbia Pictures had the quality of offering directors who had the point of view of the outsider. How can I convince the audience that these productions were great and the credit goes to the studio, but at the same time, it was because of the artists, because of each individual voice involved in making the film. This program works if you just sit there from beginning to end, and it would be like a crash course on the history of not only Columbia Pictures, but also understanding the studio system. But if people want to move around and see films from different sections of the festival, I would recommend a film called Let Us Leave. It's by a German director called John Bram. He was a refugee in Hollywood who fled the Nazis. And this film, which features Henry Fonda in the main role, is about a cab driver who's been accused of a murder. And the film, for those who know The Wrong Man by Alfred Hitchcock, this is a film that anticipates The Wrong Man. It's basically The Wrong Man made 20 years before. From the 40s, if I want to recommend one title, None Shall Escape. And again, this ties with the previous film. None Shall Escape is directed by a Hungarian director, André de Todt. The film is made in 1944. The war was still going on, but this prophetic masterpiece anticipates the formation of the United Nations and the Nuremberg trials after the war. So in this fictional story, there is this sequence of the kind of a post-war tribunal, and people from different countries, different ethnicities, and different races come together to put the person responsible on trial. Hence, none shall escape, the famous line by President Roosevelt. But going in a completely different direction, the opening film of the program, My Sister Eileen, this is a film from 1956, I believe, by Richard Quine. He was born and raised in the studio, and he made this wonderful musical in CinemaScope, glorious CinemaScope, about two sisters trying to find an apartment to rent in New York City. The musical numbers are great, the colors are amazing. This is a film full of life, fun, and energy, and shows that Columbia Pictures, especially in the 50s, was very much capable in producing the same high-quality productions as any other major studio in the history of Hollywood. Of course, these films, or the majority of them, were produced so fast that there was no time for assessment. It was like a factory production. There was no time to pause and wonder, we have created some art. Now, in Locarno, in 2024, we have the moment to pause and treat them as artworks.